Hello, everyone. We'll be with you shortly. We're just waiting for a few more people to join. Hello, everyone. We'll be with you shortly. We're just waiting for a few more people to join. Well, hello, everyone. We're excited to bring back our Tea at 3 on Wednesdays. And for today, we're going to start off with one of my favorite places to visit, Newfoundland and Labrador. And before we get started, I wanted to do a few housekeeping items. The session is being recorded, and once it's recorded, it'll be sent out to everyone that registered for the webinar today. So if anyone you know hasn't joined, they will receive the recording, and it will also be embedded in our website under the webinars and also with the tour itself. So if you want to view later, or if you have people you want to show the recording to, it gives them a great idea of the tour. So with that said, today, like I said, Newfoundland and Labrador is, I've traveled a lot, and it's one of my favorite places. When I'm out selling Newfoundland and Labrador, I always refer to it as the Alaska of the East. We have all of those gems that people love to see, and notwithstanding the moose, the caribou, the puffins, they're always a favorite, the whales, and of course those majestic icebergs are all part of the experience there, and the people are an amazing part of the adventure. And our programming generally concentrates on doing all of Newfoundland and Labrador, and we have lots of tours that do the whole province, but this program is really special in the fact that we're doing the west coast of Newfoundland. And what we really wanted to accomplish here was going over to Labrador and experiencing something very unique with Battle Harbour. And by the nature of this tour, because Battle Harbour is only accessible if you stay overnight, so we'll be staying on this beautiful island outport for 2 nights, and that allows us to experience it, and we're limited to the number of accommodation on the island. So by the nature of this tour, it will be a small group departure with a maximum ridership of 26 people. So without any further ado, my special guest today is Karen Hatcher, a longtime friend of mine, an employee, and one of her favorite jobs as tour director for Atlantic Tours is Newfoundland and Labrador. She loves the province just like I do. So I'm going to turn it over to her and let her present Battle Harbour and the Newfoundland and Labrador's Northern Peninsula. So Karen, over to you.
Excellent, Richard. Thank you so much. And as Richard said, Newfoundland and Labrador are my absolute favorite places to travel when I'm touring with Atlantic Tours. However, Atlantic Canada has all of its special and unique places. Battle Harbour, I had the privilege of heading over there in 2019, and on this little snapshot of what we're going to show you today, start thinking about 2022. So I'm going to start advancing the slides. I'll tell some stories as we go along and go through the itinerary that we've laid out for this very exciting new tour. And as Richard said, we're focusing on the West Coast, we're focusing on Labrador, and we're focusing on the Northern Peninsula. So as you come along, of course, here's our Atlantic Canada map. This tour will be starting in Halifax, but we can do pickups along the way for any Maritimers through the Truro, New Glasgow, and into Cape Breton, because our first day is as we're leaving Halifax, and here's a majestic view of our downtown citadel, the Halifax Harbour, and the downtown core. So for those of you flying into Halifax, you'll be transferred to a downtown hotel where you'll get to meet your tour director at an opening reception, and have a leisurely morning the day of departure with some ideas of where you'd like to walk around and sightsee in Halifax. And then we'll get on to one of our motor coaches and start making our way across Nova Scotia. Atlantic Tours and Travel, look, right on the side of the coach are some puffins. Will we see puffins on this trip? Well, sign up now, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later.
And Karen, I always like to talk a little bit about the motor coach with 2006 on it. That's not the year of the motor coach. Our coach partner is Coach Atlantic here in Atlantic Canada, and their buses are all numbered. So that one's the year 2000, and the 6th bus purchased in the year 2000. So I always like to mention that it's not a 2006 motor coach. It is a modern. We usually have within the oldest is usually about 5 years old.
Well, and on the motor coach with the wrapping, those puffins, those aren't life size. And you might be surprised at the people who think those are the size of the puffins you're going to see. Puffins are about this tall. Anyway, that aside, excellent observation. As we depart Halifax, we're going to make our way to Sydney. So we'll be traveling through Truro and through Pictou County, crossing the Canso Causeway into Cape Breton, and we'll make a stop in Sydney for an included dinner as we start getting ready to make our way back to North Sydney, just a short 15-minute drive away, where we'll be boarding one of the Marine Atlantic ferries. So we're doing the overnight crossing. As we board the ferry, we'll board on the motor coach. We suggest to everybody only have a carry-on piece of luggage because the elevators are very small. The rooms are very small. And to kind of put it in perspective, if you've ever traveled on a train, the rooms or the berths on board these ferries aren't much larger, but they all have private bathrooms. So we'll get checked in on the ferry. We'll all have our own berth, just as though we were checking into a hotel. So you'll get to your rooms, get snuggled in. There's either 2 single beds or 4 single beds in each of the berths. The ferry leaves at about 11:45 at night, and your goal that evening is to have a wonderful nap. So, you know, nestle in, have a good night's sleep. The wake-up call in the morning is we'll be docking in 1 hour, and that's your first wake-up call. Your second wake-up call, we'll all meet, go down to the coach, and then we'll start making our way off of the ferry. We'll have an included breakfast on land that morning, and then we'll start our drive through the beautiful Codroy Valley. This is a picture and an image of Corner Brook. That's about 2 hours and 15 minutes from Port aux Basques, where the ferry lands. We'll get out and stretch our legs and have a morning break and continue making our way north as we head up towards Port aux Choix. And in Port aux Choix, our first sightseeing destination of that day is going to be in the very picturesque community and at the National Historic Site. What was really exciting about this small town is that somebody went to build a house and they started digging in to put a foundation in and started finding artifacts. And in locating these artifacts, they brought in the archaeologists and they found the first proof of the maritime archaic Indians and the Paleo Eskimos. And so this has now become a very historic national park area. And you start to learn a lot of the original history of Newfoundland. So from the museum and just down at the end of the road, there's a beautiful lighthouse. Something that we always look for here, and in recent years, there's been a small herd of caribou that like to feed in this area. Will they be there? One never knows until we get there. I've seen a few moose here. And I actually, right off of, from the lighthouse in the water, you never know, you sometimes see humpback whales as they're going around. So this night, pardon me?
Karen is certainly one of my favorite days. Even though we're covering a lot of territory on this day, it's predominantly a driving day until we get to Port aux Choix, but it's absolutely stunning scenery. I said, you know, something that's just breathtaking because you have the beautiful water views on your left going up and all of the fjords and mountains on your right. And so to me, even the trees don't obstruct much of your view because they're all very small. So, you know, often people will say, that seems like a fair distance. It is. We want to get the travel out of the way, but it is a stunning day just to sit back after a ferry and enjoy the beautiful panoramic landscape views. They are stunning all the way up to Port aux Choix.
And as I mentioned, we make that stop in Corner Brook, but we'll also make a stop in Rocky Harbour. And as Richard was saying, you know, the water views are to our left, the mountain views are to our right. And yes, we cover a massive amount of ground that day, but it lays the groundwork for what's ahead of us over the next couple of days. We're going to stay that night at the Sea Echo Motel in the beautiful little shrimp fishing community of Port aux Choix. We're right on the water. So after our included dinner that night, if you want to get out for a walk, you know, we'll point out some sites and trails that you can get out after dinner that evening. And there's some unique items on the menu for our included dinner. The next day, we're going to continue along and we're continuing north. And our first stop of the day is going to be at L'Anse aux Meadows National Historic Site. This is a UNESCO Heritage Site, and that means United Nations Education, Scientific, Cultural Organization, and it has the designation for a reason. Here we're going to learn about the Vikings or the Norse people. And it came down to archaeologists coming in and starting to look at places where possibly the Norse people had resided, and the digs began, and they found artifact after artifact. And they came over a multitude of years. And today what we'll see are replicas we'll have people in character portraying the Vikings, and the Vikings were the people who went out and took from others and brought back. A Viking is not a person, that's a job. The Norse people are who lived here. And what's behind these two gentlemen are one of the replicas of the longhouses and how they lived. See the young fellow peeking through the door. So we'll not only have a guided tour through L'Anse aux Meadows, we'll learn about the archaeological digs, we'll learn about the artifacts, but then we'll be able to get into the replicas and be able to get right into what L'Anse aux Meadows is all about. It's right out on the ocean. And now we're truly in the Northern Peninsula. From L'Anse aux Meadows, we'll make our way into the beautiful small little town of St. Anthony. If you spell it out by syllables, it's 4 syllables, St. Anthony, or in Newfoundland, 2 syllables, Snantony. Snantony for the night. And there we'll have time to explore around the little bights and the little coves. This is July, and so what could we see off of the coast? Well, we could be seeing some Newfoundland dogs. We're always looking for them. They're a very unique breed of dog. This particular one is portrayed at a place called the Dark Tickle, and we'll talk more about that on the tour, what a tickle is, but what this particular organization is. But here's some moose. The entire time we're traveling, from the moment we get off the ferry the day before, our driver, of course, is the #1 moose watcher, but we want everybody to be on alert. Moose were not indigenous to Newfoundland. 2 pairs were brought over in the early 1900s, and now there's over 140,000 moose around the island, and they're majestic. So we want to be looking out for them. Our driver will be alert the whole time. And when we're in St. Anthony, something off of the coastline that we could see is this very, very familiar sight, and that would be the tail of a humpback whale as they're making their way. Humpback whales will come up along the east coast of Newfoundland all the way up to the Northern Peninsula. About the end of June they arrive, and the reason they're arriving at that time are the capelin, and these are small fish that will start spawning on the shores of Newfoundland, and these are why the humpbacks come to feed. They winter in the Dominican Republic, and they make their way north during the winter, or during the summer, so that they can feed. Majestic icebergs will also be seen as we're anywhere along that northern coast, and as we then start making our way on the next day over for the ferry to Labrador. So we'll have a drive from St. Anthony. We'll come back along the same route. There's basically one highway, the 430, that will take us all the way up to St. Anthony. We'll come down to the small community of St. Barb. We'll get checked in to the Labrador Ferry. It's about an hour and 45-minute crossing across the Strait of Belle Isle. And when we arrive in Blanc-Sablon, Quebec. So we'll come off the ferry in Quebec. We'll have about a 5-minute drive. Will take us into Labrador. And then we'll start driving along the coast of Labrador. So the water will now be on our right-hand side as we're heading north. We'll have very scenic drives, looking out for icebergs. And we're going to see a very different landscape, where it's the glacial erratics, where boulders are just, look to be standing on top of other rocks. The trees get very, very small. We'll continue driving. We'll go past Red Bay. And this is a small fishing community. I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. Continue our way up to an area known as St. Mary's. And that's where we'll get off our coach. We'll have smaller luggage if you have it, or the big luggage you can take. And we're going to get on a ferry. And I'm going to quote that, quote unquote ferry. Well, it's a converted fishing boat is what this ferry is. And this is our ferry to Battle Harbour. And this is an exciting part of what I want to talk about today. Of all of the touring I've done for Atlantic Tours, my experience in Battle Harbour was one of the most authentic experiences I've ever had. And to be an opportunity to go back, and for anybody interested in going, please put it on your bucket list. So in St. Mary's, we're going to get on this ferry, the converted fishing boat. We'll have about a 45-minute crossing over to a small island. And this is the island of Battle Harbour. So this is just an artist rendering, kind of shows you the buildings as they're laid out. It's not a large community, but what is very unique about this community, I'm going to just advance a couple of slides and give you about the uniqueness. Here's the island itself, and there's little walking paths and trails. You can walk all the way around the island. It's about a 2-kilometer hike. But here's the view that you'll see as we're approaching Battle Harbour. It was a fishing community. And up until the early 1900s, these people lived on this island and they fished cod. That was the primary source of income, both commercial and for looking after families. And then in the early 1990s, the federal government declared a moratorium on cod fishing. Nobody can fish cod again, period. Not even to go out and catch a fish to put on your dining room table that night. Well, this devastated fishing communities, and Battle Harbour was no different. But what Battle Harbour did was embrace, what can we do next to make this, our livelihood, still come back to life? So the local fishermen, and right now, those who live on Battle Harbour are 5th generation cod fishermen. They went from being cod fishermen one day to being general contractors the next day. And they started renovating the old buildings that you see around. This is the dock. So the green boat that you see right on the dock, that is probably the ferry that we'll take, or a similar boat to that. And when you come off of the boat, all of these clusters of buildings, one would have been the salt house, one would have been a warehouse, one would have been where they stored the fish, one would have been where they did the sealing pelts. And so these fishermen / now general contractors renovated this space. They went into the buildings and they put them back in to restore them so that we, who like to experience something authentic, can come and experience it. This is an example of wood being dried. You can see how it's standing up on its end. Well, if you put a piece of wood on its end, all of the water will wick to the bottom. And we'll see these a couple times on our travels. Just off in the distance, you see an iceberg traveling by Battle Harbour Island. This is the general store. Significant part on our tour here, because the upstairs of this general store is the only place you're going to have Wi-Fi. So what's also upstairs, they built this into a lounge. Our time, when we stay here, we're going to be staying in converted buildings, which will become our accommodations. This was the old kitchen building, and now it's bedrooms. So you'll have private bedrooms, just like in a hotel. You'll have private bathrooms. Some rooms have 2 beds, some just have 1. There's little space heaters, because even in July, when I was there July the last time, it was only 7 degrees. So they keep the rooms nice and toasty for us. And then as we go back just down the hill, this general store, further down the hill, as we see the large buildings by the dock, that's where the dining hall is. So the cluster of buildings, one of the large buildings converted to accommodations, you can see in the background, and then the foreground would be the dining hall. So back to the general store, upstairs, they put in a lounge. So there's a little bar there. So after dinner, which is an included meal, we all make our way upstairs in the general store. You might want to have a swally or a nightcap. They'll have some live entertainment for us. And this is where you can check your emails or send your text messages, because this will be the only place we'll have Wi-Fi. Once again, it makes it just so much more authentic. And then downstairs, there's a little gift shop. There are some general store items, some snacks if you wanted to purchase anything.
Well, the other great thing about the authenticity, Karen, is the fact that in coming up with this port, I mean, it's a great example of life in Newfoundland in many communities when fishing was king. And so this is a living museum of sorts of what an Outport life was like. But I think one of the exciting things here is, rather than have the masses, they decided the only way to visit Battle Harbour is to spend the night. So we're spending 2 nights and getting the complete experience, but you can't just go over as a day trip, so you're not having huge masses here. It's only those that are staying. And so when we're there, we're pretty much taking over the whole island, most of the rooms.
Absolutely. And once again, it makes it authentic. And here's the example of some of our accommodation that we'll stay in. And it is, I liked your term, a living museum, Richard, because you get to get into the buildings, but all of the people who work there live there, or they're living on the small little islands a boat ride away. For example, in the dining hall, if you look at that little island where you see a couple of buildings on, right in the middle of what would be called the Tickle, well, that's where Muriel lives. And Muriel's one of the cooks in the kitchen. And people always say, well, what are our meals going to be like when we're there? Or what are we having for dinner tonight? And the last time I had to say, I don't know. And it's not that Atlantic Tours didn't plan it. It's left to the planning of the locals who are putting together this experience for us. So now we look after everybody's dietary concerns and food sensitivities. Those are all passed on. And then a meal is prepared to us, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, served by Muriel and Janet, who are in the kitchen. And actually, the last time I was there, we came into dinner, and dinner was served, and we had cod that night. Not an unfamiliar meal when you're in Newfoundland. There was an alternate for those who didn't eat seafood. And Muriel came out and stood at the end of the table, and she took us to the window and pointed out where her house was, so we knew how close she was. And her husband went out and caught the cod that morning, brought it to the kitchen, and they prepared it for us for dinner. So once again, it's truly an authentic experience. What you're seeing here, this is called a fishing flake. So the building that is just at the back, the taller building, that's our dining hall. And a fishing flake was built out of wood, spaced close together, but enough so that air could get in between. And when they were drying the codfish, they would open it up and lay it out on these flakes, and the air would come up from underneath and the air would be from above. And the biggest thing about drying cod was to get it as dry as you possibly could, as quickly as possible, and then salt it. And so a lot of these buildings were used just for the salt that was imported from the south, and they'd bring it in, they'd salt all the cod, they put it in barrels, and this is how you would preserve it. So the vision of the flake, which is that large rectangle, just looks like a wobbly piece of wharf. It's not, that's drying fish. And then you can see some of the wood stacked up on its end, wicking, so that the wood to go on the flakes are drying. There's a nicer view of Muriel's house just across the way, she and her husband. So I had the opportunity to go through and take a lot of pictures the last time. This would be the old pork store. So once again, it was used for storing pork fat, because what goes better with cod than pork scrunchions? So they did have bringing in the pork, where they would then once again salt that, and they'd be able to store it. Anything that you were able to salt meant you didn't need refrigeration and it wouldn't go bad. So these buildings are converted into museum exhibits. Our guide that we had when we went on the walking tour, because the next morning we'll go down for an included breakfast, and then Cyril was our guide, and he was, as he said, a 5th generation fisherman, now general contractor. He lives right on Battle Harbour, and his job is maintaining all of these buildings now, whether it be from a construction perspective or bringing people through and pointing out how it all worked back in the early 90s and before, when this was an active living fishing community. This is a fishing weir. So that would be a net that would be thrown out. You can see the buoys all along the top of the net. They would float, and just a way of catching maybe some herring or some mackerel. But the cod, they wouldn't use these weirs for the cod fishing. That was more jigging.
And there's to see the excitement of the staff and the guides as well, because, you know, when these outports were closed, everyone was forced to leave these facilities and islands. So for them to be able to come back and experience what their ancestors did in these communities has been exciting for them, because everywhere else the outports are basically gone because the government relocated everyone off these islands.
And that's a very good point. This piece of land that you see to the left-hand side of this image, so straight ahead the building, that's our dining hall. If you continue to the left, you can see the top of a boat. That will be our ferry, because this day we're going to head back. But there's an island across the way. So the morning we do a walking tour with a guide, that afternoon, there's a couple of excursions. One is to get on a boat, and you do a 2-hour kind of around the island and seeing the island from the water perspective. Or for those who have a very adventuresome spirit and some good hiking shoes and strong legs, we can get in a boat and go across the Tickle. And what is a Tickle? It's a body of water between 2 land masses that's very shallow, and the water runs quickly. So we take a boat over to the land, that hill that you see across this image, and we go for about a 2.5-hour hike. So we go to the top of that hill and go down into the ravines. And what we are going to happen upon are some resettlement areas. And this is what Richard was alluding to, that in the 50s and 60s and even early 70s, there were places that got resettled in Newfoundland and Labrador simply because they were so remote. This was after Confederation. There were no services, there were no doctors, no hospitals, no post office, no mail delivery. So they encouraged people to relocate. And that wasn't just packing a suitcase and moving. That was taking your house. So to take your house somewhere, you need to put it on barrels so they would float, and they would literally float their homes off of these remote islands or these outports to more populated areas. So on this hike, we get into a couple of the resettled areas, and it's just some foundations that are left or some outbuildings. Or if you're taking the boat tour, you'll be able to see that from the water as well. So this day, we're making our way back to Blanc-Sablon, and we'll be overnighting in L'Anse-aux-Clercs overnight, and we'll hop on the ferry the next morning. No, I'm sorry, we're not hopping on the ferry. I digress. From here, we're going down to Red Bay. So we take our 45-minute ferry ride back to Labrador. So we're back on the main portion of Labrador, and we drive south. And this is Red Bay National Historic Site. So Red Bay National Historic Site is a UNESCO Heritage World Site as well, but this is all about whaling. This is where the Basque whalers came over in the late 1500s, the early 1600s. They came over in their huge galleons, and they would go whaling. And what was the purpose of whaling? Well, it was money, but what type of whales did they hunt? And those would be the right whale. And the reason they're called the right whale is that, in fact, they were the right whale to hunt. Right whales stay at the surface longer than any other whale, and they're slow moving. So these large whaling ships would come in. The fishermen would come into this small cove area, and that's where they would anchor their ships. And then the fishermen themselves would get on these little boats called chalupas. And there's an image off on the right-hand side of the fishermen coming up along a whale. They would harpoon the whale and bring the whale to shore. And that's where they would start rendering. They would get the oils out. They would bring out all of the bone, and everything was purposed. The meat was purposed, and it was all barreled and packaged and put on the big galleon ships and brought back to Europe. So this little community is now a National Historic Site because we learn about, really the first fishermen that came in and what they were looking for. But once again, why were the whales there? The whales were there because the fish was there. So we'll spend some time here this afternoon. Then we'll make our way back down through the coast. We'll go through Pinware Valley. We go into a little community called L'Anse-aux-Clercs, where we're probably going to substantially increase the population that night. We'll have an overnight at the Northern Lights Inn. And then the next morning, we'll be making our way to the ferry. We will have another stop that day, and this is at the Amour Lighthouse. And this is a very, very unique lighthouse because we not only can get into the lighthouse keeper's area where he lived, but we'll be able to get right up into the light mechanism and look at this spectacular view. If anybody's knees are buckling, it's a nice walk upstairs, or if somebody's not comfortable going all the way up into the light, then there's all the park area, and there's a museum that's there as well.
You can see how small the coach looks from there. It's I said I'd climb this a number of times, and the views are stunning there out across the strait and across the water. But no, it's absolutely a great stop. And I said the Red Bay site, is tremendous in the fact that in a lot of respects it was one of the first industrialization sites of North America. The harvesting of the whale oil, and wonderful for us that we have so many UNESCO designations. Certainly Newfoundland and Labrador with the varying sites, but Red Bay is beautiful.
So back on the ferry, we'll reverse our hour and 45 minutes across. Do a little drive into Quebec, get on the ferry, across the Belle of St. Isle, and you never know, the night before, there's a nice little beach by our hotel. You might want to go down and dip your toes into the Strait of Belle Isle. So we arrived back at St. Barb, and now we're going to start driving south. So where the water had been on our left and the mountains on our right going up, the water's on our right, the mountains are on our left, and we're going to be making our way into the beautiful community and town of Cowhead. We'll be overnighting for 2 nights at the Shallow Bay Motel. Meals are included here. Very unique small town right on the water, beautiful sunsets, a beach that you can walk to. But there's also a theater here, the Gros Morne Theater. And although not included in our tour, we always look at what's playing and what's available when we're staying there, and you secure tickets for anybody who's interested in live entertainment and theater while we're there. The next day, we'll start our tours into yet another UNESCO World Heritage Site, and that is Gros Morne National Park. And this is a beautiful image of Gros Morne. Although it's not the tallest mountain at the national park, it is certainly the namesake and the most majestic looking. Our travels will take us down to Bonne Bay, where we'll board a catamaran-style boat and have a very unique experience. The commentary is phenomenal about the rock formations and how these mountains were formed. But the most unique feature that we're going to see and experience are the Tablelands. And between Gros Morne Mountain and the Tablelands, this is what formed Gros Morne National Park. This image that you were seeing, all of this land should be at the bottom of the ocean. And it was during the movement of the tectonic plates where this land was forced to the surface. It has a very unique color and a very unique presentation. And we'll be able to walk right along the base of the Tablelands. So we'll spend some fabulous time throughout Gros Morne. We'll make our way back to Cowhead. We'll stop for some photo stops along the way, Western Brook Pond, some beautiful scenery shots, through Rocky Harbor. And overnighting, dinner included. The next morning, we're going to start making our way continue making our way south, but we'll make this stop at the Lobster Cove Head Lighthouse, part of Gros Morne National Park. So this is where the building you're seeing is where the lighthouse keeper would live. I want to point out the flags to the left, and this is the fun part of coming here. You see the Canadian flag at the very top, and then the series of flags that are flying below that, they'll spell out a word. There'll be a legend just close to the front door, and the Parks Canada guides here have fun every day putting up a word of the day, which then becomes something that I like to take a look at and have fun with people. So this is the Lobster Cove Head Lighthouse. Our drive will then continue us down into Deer Lake, and we're going to make a stop at the Newfoundland Insectarium. First time I went here, I was blown away by this because it's like, okay, Newfoundland insects, let's see what this is all about. But the first big exhibit that we go into is a butterfly house. And it's all temperature controlled. You go through a series of doors so that the butterflies don't escape, because that would defeat the purpose. You're in this room and there's literally butterflies flying all around. They might land on your shoulder. You really have to watch your step where you're walking. So it's a very unique part of this museum that we're going in. The other part that I found just fascinating is the owner is very passionate about this, and this is honeybees. And they have one of the best honeybee hives that you could possibly experience, with the information and presentation and background to go with it. This particular hive, you'll get pointed out where the queen is, and you'll see all the bees that are around the queen and their jobs. You can see the chute that goes outside and where these bees will then leave and fly sometimes 200 or 250 kilometers to get what they need to bring back to the hive. So it is a very unique spot going into the insectarium.
Well, I can remember, Karen, when this first came, available to tour, I thought, why would I ever want to do that in Newfoundland and Labrador? Sort of the same as you. And it is an amazing experience. They do an amazing job. And it tells me I don't have to go to Cayman Island to see a butterfly conservatory. They have it right here in our backyard. But no, like you said, the bee presentation is amazing.
And the person who does the presenting, he's very passionate about it too. I didn't think I could learn that much about a honeybee, so I was pleasantly surprised. Now our drives continue, and we're going to make our way back through Codroy Valley. We'll retrace our steps back by Corner Brook, by Stephenville, back to Port aux Basques, and we'll do our check-in for, once again, an overnight crossing. You'll know the drill by this time, that get comfortable in your room. You can walk about the ship. Beautiful sights when we were landing in Port aux Basques, to get up on the top deck on a beautiful morning to see Newfoundland, but equally as beautiful as we're coming back into North Sydney. We'll come off the ship, we'll stop for breakfast and make a nice, beautiful, leisurely drive as we make our way back to Halifax, doing any drop-offs along the way. And then for those of you, we're back at home in our city, and that will conclude our Newfoundland, Labrador, Battle Harbour. As I said, one of my most exciting places to go. I'm heading to Newfoundland on Saturday, so I can't wait. So
yes, it's going to be great to have that tour going to Newfoundland this weekend. And thank you, Karen, for another wonderful presentation on on one of both of our favorite places to go. And just keep in mind, we do have a number of other Newfoundland and Labrador trips like the one Karen is doing, which run pretty much every week during our normal seasons. We hope to be back to rights next year and be running all of those trips. And we also have some recordings of that you did as far as our regular 13-day tour that does all of Newfoundland and Labrador, not the West Coast. But we're excited to be offering this for the first time coming up for next season. And one of the things that I neglected to say at the beginning was if you had any questions, please type them in the question box or chat box and we'll answer them. And so I'll have a look there to see if there's anything that's come in. But no questions at this time. And I really, I guess the only other thing I would throw in is I'm sure some people have some questions. If you are arriving from away, we can add pre or post nights, even within the Maritime provinces. We can do that in Halifax for you or anywhere you'd like to go. So that's no challenge for us to add. And we can also pair this with other trips. We have many trips doing both the Maritime provinces and Newfoundland throughout the season, running from early June into mid-October. So, and often they line up so that they can be combined with something else. Anything else you want to throw in there, Karen?
I don't think so. I'm excited that travel is resuming, and with Atlantic Tours and Travel, we do everything very safely. Our motor coach partners have the partitioned plexiglass on board, of course, little Purell on the way in, a little Purell on the way out. The coach is sanitized every night, so you can, with confidence, know that you're traveling in a very safe, clean environment. And I'm just one of the tour directors that does Newfoundland, but we've got an amazing team straight across the board for any travels you do with us.
Absolutely.
We like to have fun, so come travel with us.
Yes, for sure. We have a great team of tour directors that have been with us for years, and they have the passion and love. I mean, they're doing this out of their choice. Many retired from other professions and love showcasing all of Atlantic Canada like I do as well. Great team here in the office putting these programs together. We've been challenged trying to find a name for this new Newfoundland tour, so we're open to suggestions to try to differentiate it from our other Newfoundland trips. But we've decided now that we're back doing the tea at 3 on Wednesdays that it's every other week. And the next one is September 22nd. I know Karen has taken down the slide, but it does say September 22nd. And it's going to be with Marion, and we're going to talk about a great tour that we're going to have coming up in the future. I believe it's 23 on Germany, Austria, and Italy. So she'll be hosting that trip personally herself. And then our following 2 weeks, it's going to be Ottawa and Quebec City that we're going to be talking about, which is a spring tour for next year, 2022. So keep us in mind, let everyone know we're back to our regular tea at 3 on Wednesdays. And like I said, through September, we've decided to go every other week. A lot of people have a lot of events coming up in the fall season. So we look forward to seeing you all again in 2 weeks. Thanks again, Karen. And if you have any further questions, please reach out to reservations at Atlantic Tours and we'll answer them. And just remember that if you've attended today's session, you will get a thank you with a link to today's recording. So thank you and see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you.